Now, I was going to say, I think everyone's kind of with their groups, but I always like to get an idea as to where everyone's from before we start. You, sir, point at you first. Where did you say you were from?
New Jersey.
New Jersey. Oh, fantastic. What about you folks?
Boston.
Oh, locals. Okay, nice.
Syracuse.
Okay, I was going to say Boston, but yeah, okay, got it. What about you two?
I'm in Michigan.
Michigan. Oh, wow.
I'm in Columbia County, New York.
Nice. Okay, so we got a New Yorker.
Yeah, Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. Very nice.
Philadelphia.
Wait.
Philadelphia.
I really need a drink of
Water.
Water.
Sorry.
It's water.
That was my way of testing if you were actually from Philly. I'm with my you folks. Okay, so we got a lot of Northeasterners, right? Okay.
It's right here.
Very good reason why I asked where everyone's from, because there is some geography involved, because guess what, folks? This is the whirlwind tour through middle school social studies, right? By the way, my name is Captain Anderson, so I'll be hosting this thing. You can't just call me PJ if I just don't let the red coat outside you say that, right? Now, if you're here, and I've already talked to a few of you, I assume you've heard of the French and Indian War before, yes? Okay, let's push a little bit. So, French and Indian War is part of a much larger European global conflict between what two colonial superpowers first? Anyone know?
France and England.
What was that?
France and England.
France and, well, technically we have to say Britain, right?
Britain, yes.
Because at this point, after the Union in 1707, England has joined with their neighbors to the north, Scotland, and as we know, Scotland and England have always gotten along so well with each other. They never fought or anything, and they never will, right? Yeah. Okay, now, of course, this war that I'm talking about, does anyone know the name of this war on a global scale? In North America, we call it the French and Indian War. Anyone?
7 Years War.
7 Years War, fought from 1754 to 1763 for a total of
7 years.
9 years. Exactly, I done it right. Okay, so you got that much at least, right? Now, here's where the social studies part comes in, right? Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, all wars are fought over what? That's a good question.
Land.
What's that? Now, everyone always says land first, but broaden that definition a bit. What's that? Who said that? Head of the class, right here. Well done. Resources, not just land, but everything that comes off the land, and you know what I'm saying, food, etc. Right? Okay. Knowing this, of course, this is not lost on the Europeans who first come to the area, right? But before we talk about them, I do have to mention something, and I'm sure a lot of you know this. The Native Americans were here for far longer than the Europeans. In this particular area of New York, the oldest artifacts we have, which are actually in this display case right in front of you two, date back some 8,000 years, right? Now, we go back that far in Native American history, they haven't really coalesced into the nation states that the Europeans recognize when they get here. Now, I do have some New Yorkers in the audience, so... Bless you. Excuse me. Sorry, yeah, sorry. That's right, everyone. The Latin say sacrament, right? Once in a lifetime experience that happens 9 times a day. Now, as I was saying, I have some New Yorkers in the group, right? Does anyone know the name of the nation of Native Americans that were from New York? Starts with an I. Yes, sir.
Iroquois.
Iroquois, yes. So the French pronunciation. Now, of course, the Iroquois, they didn't call themselves that. Like I said, there was a French name for them. They called themselves the Haudenosaunee, right? Now, of course, this is a coalition of 6 different tribes that are all unified together in a single political body, right? The largest tribe, though, which was also the most warlike, that is from this part of New York. Does anyone know the tribe that was native to this area? And they're named after a haircut they didn't actually have. The Mohawk, right? Now, the Mohawk, of course, didn't call themselves Mohawk. The name for themselves, I'm going to try and get the intonation right here, was Ganyangayaga, which means people of the flint, right? Appropriate for the most warlike group. Now, we cross over Lake Champlain, and we encounter a different coalition of Native Americans who are kind of rivals with the Iroquois. This group, this nation, starts with an A. Anyone know this group? Yes, very good, yes. And of course, the most warlike group butts right next to the Mohawk, appropriately, right? Does anyone, this is a little trickier, does anyone know the name of the group that was right on the other side of Lake Champlain that were rivals to the Mohawk? A. Also with A, yeah. Oh, wait, you went too far west whoever said that. I was like, Abenakis. Has anyone ever heard of that? Yes, the Abenakis, right? Now, Mohawks, Abenakis, I said they live right next door to each other. Do you think they like each other particularly much? Now, this might come into play later on in the story. Now, of course, the first people who come into the area, the first Europeans, that is, right, are of a certain persuasion, both in terms of the country they're from and their religion. So now I'm going to draw your attention to that guy over there in the display case. Father Isaac Jogues. Now with a name like Isaac Jogues, what country do you think he is from? He's from France, of course, right? He comes here with the brilliant idea of converting the Abenakis to Catholicism. Do you think they're very receptive to it?
No.
Not most of them, right? Jogues' real significance in the history of this fort, though, is he gives the lake outside its first European name. Now, I do have to note, I'm very partial to the original Mohawk name for the lake. Very cool, right? The original Mohawk name for the lake is Andiataroge, which means the place that shuts itself in. Right? Kind of cool. He gives it the name, though, Lac du Saint-Sacrement. Anyone here speak French, even un petit peu?
Saint Clement's Lake.
What was that?
Saint Clement Lake.
No, it's not it's not Lac du Saint Clement. It's Lac du Saint Sacrement. So the sacred, correct. So the sacred sacrament that involves water, ma'am, is what? What? The sacred sacrament in Catholicism that involves water. You know, yeah, that's it, exactly. Yeah, baptism. The new people got it. Well done. Welcome. Yeah. So he deems that the waters of what will become Lake George are clean enough to be baptized in. And interestingly, we still have busloads of people who come down from Quebec to be baptized in the lake. But I don't think they got the memo. The water quality has somewhat changed over the last 400 or so years, right? But that's neither here nor there, right? Now, that's really his significance. Now, if we want to get into the military history of the fort, we have to jump forward in time about a century after Isaac Jogues is here. He's here, by the way, mid-1630s to 1640s. And if you folks want to push in a little bit closer, I'm actually going to draw your attention to this delightful map right here. Now, like I said, I have a lot of New Yorkers in this group. New Yorkers don't disappoint me, right? By the way, on this map, north towards me, south is towards you folks, right? We see there are 3 bodies of water. New Yorkers, what's this river right here?
Hudson.
You can also just read the map. I just won't point that out. Right? Very well done, though. Good, good, good. This lake, that's the one outside.
Lake George.
I was getting nervous when people don't get that one fast, right? And this is the tail end of a much larger lake with the French name a little bit further north of us.
Champlain.
Champlain, of course, right? These 3 bodies of water make a beautiful north-south passageway. And again, going back to what we said earlier, what are all wars fought over? They're fought over resources. And what a better way to transport resources in the 18th century than this waterway? Of course, this isn't lost on France and Britain. And remember, France at this point, beginning of the 18th century, controls the territory in the north, and Britain controls the territory kind of in the south, right? Now, in 1755, when war breaks out between France and Britain for like the 4th time in 100 years, right? France really decides to get a bit aggressive and try and take an active attempt to control this waterway. So they build a fort right here. Can you see the name of the fort? It's also that fort.
Carry on.
Have you heard of this fort before? It's fairly famous in American history, right? But I should note, Ticonderoga is the name that the British give to the fort after they capture, oh, sorry, spoilers. Right? Originally it's a French fort, so of course it has a French name. The original name of Fort Ticonderoga in French is Fort Carillon. Or as most Americans say, Fort Carillon, right? But you gotta kind of go in the back of the nose with the French pronunciations, right? Now, tactically speaking, that is not a bad spot to build the fort because not only does it control the entire southern half of Lake Champlain, but it also controls access to that La Chute River, which feeds into Lac du Saint-Sacrement, which basically prevents any British forays northwards, right? Not bad. But of course, as the French construct this fort, guess who gets wind that they're building it?
The British.
Well, the British, of course. And do you think the British, being British, are going to stand for that? No, of course not. So they decide to get their own guy to build their own forts, right? Who's the guy they picked to build all these forts? Well, not you, sir. That guy over there in the display case, Sir William Johnson. No relation to Howard. Good laugher. Yes. Come on, you guys didn't get. By the way, that's another piece of Lake George history. I don't know if you knew this. We had the last hojos in the world, which was up on the hill over there. Now it's a sushi wall. Exactly right. Yeah, kind of interesting. But as I was saying, no relation to Howard, right? Now, Sir William Johnson is kind of an interesting choice to pick to build a series of military forts. Why? Because he has no military experience whatsoever. Now, yeah, most people hear this, of course, man, they're like, oh, how quintessentially British, right? But Johnson actually has some other qualifications that make him not so bad of a candidate. First of all, he's an engineer, which is kind of important if you're building force, if you know what I'm saying, right? And he also acts as a diplomat on behalf of the British government to the Native Americans in the area, the Mohawk. And remember, the forts that he's building are technically in Mohawk territory, so it seems like he's actually a pretty decent man for the job, right? Now, Johnson is initially stationed in Albany, right? There we go, right? Okay, as I was saying, Johnson is stationed in Albany, and his initial task is he has to take about 2,000 provincials. Again, provincials are just kind of American colonists wearing whatever they happen to have on their backs, right? And they have to march north about 35 to 40 miles, and they have to cut a length of military road that is as long as that, which means that the road has to be, of course, big enough to accommodate cannon carriages. Now, it's usually when I'm talking about this that people are like listening, like, oh yeah, oh hum, whatever, right? But remember, these guys, these men, they're walking this whole distance in the middle of July, and they're wearing delightful, breathable wool clothing from head to toe. They're cutting these trees down with hand tools, and remember, little ecological history, if you know what I'm saying. Back then, New York was covered in old-growth forest. According to the primary sources we have, 15 to 18 men could link their arms around the bases of these trees. Yeah, 35 to 48 miles of that. Doesn't that sound like a fun summer job, right? But of course, you cut down that many miles of trees that large, you have quite a bit of what left over? Wood, which is perfect for building. What you're really set on the ship thing, I noticed. Not ships, sir. What? Forts, exactly, right? And Johnson.
I'm wondering how the ships got built up there.
We'll get to that, if you know what I'm saying. But they actually built them in Schenectady, just as a little aside. That was like the biggest shipbuilding area in the. So most of the boats that used to come up the Hudson were actually built there. But the wood they cut down is mostly used for, as you said, forts. Johnson ultimately built 5 forts along the Hudson River, right? One of them, for locals, you might know what I'm talking about, especially our B-Spa people, wherever you guys are. One of them was built in modern-day Half Moon, but the name of the fort escapes me. Another one was built in modern-day Schuylerville, right where the baseball park is, Fort Hardy, right? There's another one built a little bit further north of Schuylerville called Fort Miller, which is just kind of a stay fort. And then, Johnson actually refurbishes a pre-existing fort, which is right at the bend in the Hudson River, and this ultimately is the largest fort that he builds. This fort becomes known as Fort Edward. And again, tactically speaking, the fort's right there at the bend in the Hudson River, not a bad spot if the French decide to encroach south. But Johnson is basically put in this position because he's meant to be aggressive. So it becomes apparent that he has to build at least one more fort, right? And he has a choice as to where he can build it. He can either build a fort right here at the south end of Lake Champlain, which means he'd be building the fort in the middle of a swamp. Does that sound like a good idea? Building the fort in a swamp? Not particularly, right? Or he can build it on top of a nice sandy hill at the south end of Lac du Saint-Sacrement. And I'm sure you folks know which one he picks, right? Now, of course, once he picks the spot to build the fort, he looks out over the beautiful vista of Lac du Saint-Sacrement and he goes, wow, prime real estate right here, right? Values can only go up. But the name of the lake, it's a bit French, right? So he changes the name of the lake from Lac du Saint-Sacrement to what?
St. George.
In honor of his sovereign, King George the
Second.
Very good, sir, yes. By the way, I just want to note for people who are kind of like scratching their head at this period of British history is very easy to remember the names of the kings, but it's also very difficult, because from like about 1710 to about 1834, it goes George, and George, exactly, right? And of course, Johnson names the, I love this even more, Johnson names the fort after one of the king's 3 grandsons. No. What fort are you in right now, man? Somebody's having a bit of a dissociation. Must be the heat, right? All those wool clothes. Now, as I was saying, he names the fort after one of the king's 3 grandsons. What are the names of the king's grandsons? Well, William Henry and William Henry. This is why there's a hyphen in it, because it's named after the 3rd one, right? How very clever. Now, right when Johnson basically is cutting timbers to make the base of the fort, right? They've already picked out the plot where they're going to build it. They've just started. Guess who gets wind that the British are fortifying their northern position?
The French.
The French. And do you think the French are going to stand for that? Manure! Right? So they decide to send their own men to intercept Johnson and stop him. And the French are like, who better to lead a French coalition against the British than a German? Right? So the guy they picked to lead this coalition against the British is actually half French and half Bavarian, I believe. No, half Saxon. So he's half German, right? With the equally interesting name of Jean Erdmann Ludwig von Dieskau. Yeah, French and German don't really mesh very well, do they, right? Now, Dieskau, of course, is stationed in Ticonderoga, the French fort, right? He has with him a group of about 800 French regulars. Now, what do I mean when I say French regulars? You guys have like probably a mental image of what an 18th century soldier looks like with the cocked or tricorn hat and the long wool coat. Those guys, right? But about half of his force, about 700 men in his force, are Abenakis. Again, Native Americans who are allied with the French, right? Keep this in mind, about half of his force are Native Americans. Now, Dieskau's plan is to essentially canoe down Lake Champlain from Ticonderoga, park the boats right here at the south end, and march through about 30 miles of swamp and besiege Fort Edward. Great plan, right? But guess what Dieskau doesn't bring with him that would be rather useful for besieging a fort?
Artillery.
Yeah, he doesn't bring any cannons, of course, right? Because he's going through a swamp after all. But, you know, he still has to get his men up over the wall, so guess what he brings instead?
Ladders.
Just some ladders, of course, yes, right? And of course, there's this kind of hysterical scene, a lot of the primary sources kind of detail where Dieskau can kind of see the lines of Fort Edward in the distance in the night before he's going to, you know, besiege the place. And he kind of goes, all right, boys, we're going to go besiege that. And you Native Americans, you take the ladders and you go first. What do you think the Native Americans allied with him say in response? What do you think they say? Yep, that's the polite version, of course, right? They're like, oh yeah, all 700 of us, we have a dentist appointment, we forgot, but we gotta go, right? This actually does happen, though. The Native Americans balk because they know that throwing themselves against the fort in this manner is effectively suicide. I have no other way of describing it, right? And they threaten to leave. Well, this is a bit of a problem because Dieskau has just come all this distance. To give you an idea, just going from here to here is comparable of walking from like here to, I don't know, halfway to Albany. So quite a distance. He's come all this way and he's got like nothing to show for it, right? But even though Dieskau seems a bit impetuous in this instance, he's not like a reckless idiot, if you know what I'm saying. He knows fully well that Johnson has moved the bulk of his force to the bottom of Lac du Saint-Sacrement. So what does he do? He just wheels his men around 180 degrees and he marches along this beautiful cut of military road, which Johnson just made for him, right? And the result is the very cleverly named Battle of Lake George, which happens on September 8th of 1755. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to do a little pivot here because I want to show you some of the details on this map. And you guys can push in a little bit closer if you wish. Now, let's do a little bit of a quiz. Let's see how much history you know. So, uniforms, right? We know that back in the 18th century, different countries had different colored uniforms, right? What was the color of the British uniform in the 1750s? Red. Yeah, it was very good. I was like, it was red from the time when Oliver Cromwell in the 1640s, like it's red, to World War I when the Brits were like, oh, red's a bit conspicuous, isn't it? Now, here's a trickier question, of course. What color was the French uniform in the 1750s? Blue? See, everyone says blue.
Red.
Yeah, not yet. What was that?
Red.
That would be very confusing, if you know what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Yeah, but let me explain, let me give you a clue, right? Countries actually pick the color of their uniform. I love this. Based
It was
on...
white.
We'll get to that in a second, right? Based on how cheap the dye is, right? Britain picks red because it's the cheapest dye out there. They have India in their possession this time. There's a root there called the madder root. You crush up the root, it makes it a nice brick red color. Mix it with a wool jacket and a bucket of urine, which is your mordant to get the dye to stick. Voila, red uniforms. The French rather, are like, oh, those stupid British, right? They think red is the cheapest dye, but the cheapest dye is actually...
White.
No dye, right? Exactly, right? The color of the sheet. So the French are wearing white. Please note what time of year the battle takes place. September 8th, right? And they're wearing white. Clearly the French didn't get the memo, you're not supposed to wear white after Labor Day, right? No, my point is that they're kind of a bit... conspicuous, yes, if you know what I'm saying, right? And I also have to talk about this because there is a bit of a difference in the tactics of the commanding officers, right? Do you remember what I said about Johnson? He is a man with no military experience. Interestingly, the man with no military experience tells his men to go prone, or to lay down on their stomachs, behind like a little defensive berm, about a foot high that they built with, I'll use a British term, rubbish from the wagons that brought up all the cannon supplies, if you know what I'm saying, right? Furthermore, he tells them to fire over the top of the barricade like this. Now, this is 1755. These tactics I'm describing, do they sound like they should be used in 1755? Or do they sound more like something you'd see in the battlefields of World War I or World War II? Yeah, not bad for a man with no military experience, but I have to note, Johnson is not fighting in the European style here. He's fighting like another group of people.
Natives.
The Native Americans. Wow, this really paid off for the British, if you know what I'm saying, right? Now, conversely, Dieskau, leader of the French forces, right, is a continental European gentleman, which means he's going to dress his men in brightly coloured uniforms, and they're going to wait their turn in the middle of an open field to be shot in the chest like gentlemen. Now, that sounds absurd, but is this really what they're actually thinking?
Yes.
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. Now, knowing that, and knowing that this is Johnston's line, and you guys can get a bit closer, this is Johnston's line, they're firing this way. Can you see where the French line is? If you see it, you can come right over and point to it. Or you can describe it from a distance. Do you see it? Do you see it? Was it this that you're talking about right here? The T shape? Yep, there the French are wearing white, marching right out of the woods. And also, very conveniently, very politely, they position themselves in front of something that Johnston brought, which Dieskau himself did not bring.
Artillery.
Yeah, if you look, do you see the puffs of smoke? Look how long the line is, right in front of the cannons. Now, again, it seems absurd, right? But Johnston, when he sees the French literally marching out, wearing white, out of the woods, wearing white, right in front of his cannons, he's kind of like, all right. Charge the cannons with grape shot, he says, which essentially turns the cannons into giant shotguns. He waits till the French line is about 100 yards or 300 feet away, and then he's like, okay, open them up. This is, and you folks are laughing because I'm sure you understand how absolutely devastating this opening salvo was, right? According to William Eyre, who's another engineer who helped construct this fort, this opening British barrage carves, quote, lanes, streets, and alleyways through the oncoming Frenchmen, like mowing down wheat with a scythe. And if you think that's messed up, I was like, he even notes that one Frenchman quite literally disappears from his neck to his knees. Absolutely phenomenally brutal, is what I'm saying, right? Now, noting that, you'd think that Dieskau would have the wherewithal, the common sense, to lead from the rear of the formation to keep himself out of harm's way so he can continue giving commands, right? But yeah, according to like 3 primary sources I've read, he finds himself right in the middle. And watching his men fall to his left and his right, he tries to rally them, and for his efforts, he is shot 6 times at point-blank range. In the knee, in the thigh, one sort of grazes the side of his buttock, and the last 3 go through his bladder. This way. Now, most people, when they hear this, like, oh, gross, why does he go into so much detail, right? Now, I'm a bit of a medical historian, if you weren't picking up on that, right? And you folks kind of know about the state of 18th century medicine, right? Not exactly the most cleanly, a little bit of disease being spread around, right? Given the state of 18th century medicine, this is crazy to me, Dieskau manages to survive for another 12 years. Right? That was my reaction when I heard that. But of course, aside from that reaction, my next question, my follow-up question is, yeah, exactly, right? What did they do? Did they have some kind of like metal indwelling catheter? They just plug the holes up with wine corks and, I don't know, send him on his merry. I don't know. I truly don't know. I've looked, but I will say this much. He would not have survived, I'm kind of getting out of the way to show you right here. He would not have survived had it not been for the intervention of Johnston himself. Now, I do have to mention this. We don't know if this is exactly how this transpired. This part of the story is a bit more legendary, it's a bit more embellished, if you know what I'm saying. Probably didn't happen like this. But allegedly, Johnston sees a French officer go down in the battlefield. He sees his Native American allies, the Mohawk, move in to scalp the man, and Johnston personally stops them. And Johnston, for his efforts, is shot directly in the butt. And the ball launches itself into his pelvis and stays there for the rest of his life. What a pain in the butt, right? Yeah. Now, this is how the more formal phase of the Battle of Lake George ends, with both of the commanding officers being taken off the field after being shot in kind of interesting places, if you know what I'm saying, right? But think about this from the perspective of the men who are still on the field, right? Especially for the French, right? They've just watched most of their comrades be mowed down in phenomenally brutal fashion, and they've just watched their commanding officer get shot 6 times at point-blank range. Do you think they keep it together and they rally and they push forward and they win the day? Or do you think they go running off into the woods?
They have to go running off into the woods.
Yeah, they definitely Monty Python style go running off into the woods, yes. Yeah. Now, I also have to mention Johnston's men, right? I lied to you a little bit, folks, I'm sorry. So, I was asking about the color of the British uniform. You all said red, right? Guess what? There is not a single British regular, not a single British redcoat is present at this battle. It's a different type of soldier, dressed similarly to what I'm wearing, right? They're called Provincials. These are just, again, American colonists who arrive at the fort wearing, as I said before, kind of whatever they happen to have, right? Also, most of these guys are between the ages of 16 and 22. Case in point, has anyone here ever spoken to teenage boys before? Ah, you know, they have that tendency to listen wonderfully well, right? Johnson, remember with a bullet in his butt cheek, is kind of like, okay guys, can you just stay behind the barricade? I know you want the French's stuff and they're running into the woods, but can you just not chase after them? Can you stay behind the barricade and chill out? And do you think they listen to him?
Nope.
Of course not. They break and they go running into the woods. And also, I think I can say this, given where everyone's from, it's actually the guys from New Hampshire who break first. You'd think it'd be the guys from New Jersey. Anyway, oh, sorry. Anyway. They go chasing after the French in the woods. Now, most people, when they hear this part of the story, they hear about the British line break, and they're like, oh dear, this is going to spell disaster for the British. Was anyone thinking that?
No.
Good, because in one final stroke of luck, right, Fort Edward, which again is like about 14 miles away, hears the sound of a battle up here and decides to send a detachment of about 300 men to reinforce Johnson's position. You see where this is going, right? So think about this for the rest of you, right? You have the French tearing south along the military road in like no particular order, right? You have most of Johnson's garrison, which is actually a little bit larger than the French force, chasing after them, and now you have another British force coming in the opposite direction. The result is a French sandwich aux jus, right? Now, why am I mentioning this? The aux jus part, right? Well, when all of these three forces collide in the woods about 3 miles from here, once again for the French, it's an absolute bloodbath. I believe they lose about 339 men total in this final part of the engagement. The forest is quite literally scattered with the bodies of the dead. And the provincials, in strangely British fashion, look around at the carnage and go, oh, what a bloody mess, right? We can't be bothered to clean all this up. So instead of burying the men, they gather them up and they throw them into a nearby pond, which allegedly turns blood red from all the men that they've thrown in it. And as you can see, they're very clever with the names, right? So guess what they call the pond from that day forward?
Blood pond.
Well, more like in British English, like you're swearing at the pond.
Bloody.
Bloody pond, yes, exactly, right? And if you folks want to see Bloody Pond today, you can. And you can even enjoy some Chinese food while you do. These Fong Bistro is right next to it. Or if you need sunglasses or a bathing suit, there's a Riley's right across the strip. Weird when you think about this fourth dimensionally, if you know what I'm saying, right? But if you folks, if anyone drove up here on Route 9, you do drive right by Bloody Pond, you'll see the blue and gold New York State sign on it. Says Bloody Pond 1755. Take a look, take some pictures. Definitely don't go for a swim though. Right? Now, the Battle of Lake George, just so you folks know, is kind of an opening skirmish in this fort's long and torrid 2-year history, but I have to note something before we move on. This is a resounding, if bloody, British victory, right? But it's only one victory. And I have to note, on a global scale, because we already established the French and Indian War as part of the 7 Years' War, which is a global war, France has kind of pretty handily been kicking Britain's butt. As a matter of fact, this little backwater win is the only win that Britain manages in the first 3 years of the war on a global scale. Keep that in mind as we proceed to the next